Audition time is here for more than 200 lieutenant governor wannabes. What a process. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the show where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Got a couple of Springfield well-known folks with me today to talk about what's happening at the Capitol and beyond. Jim Leach is here, back again, news and program director, WMAY Radio in Springfield. Jim, I know you get up really early in the morning, so thank you for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
Benjamin Yount is here. He is a bureau chief of Illinois State House News, which does audio, video, and print stuff over at the State House.
I don't get up early, so it's no problem.
Yes, but you've done that in the past.
Yeah, long
with
ago.
that voice, we know you've been on radio a lot. Let's talk about this lieutenant governor selection process. We have a situation where, of course, Scott Lee Cohn, the Democratic elected candidate for governor, lieutenant governor, who was elected independently from Pat Quinn, the Democratic nominee for governor, in the primary on February 2nd, had a past. People found out about it more after the election than before. You know, the politicians didn't vet him, the press didn't vet him quite enough. Lived in Chicago, owns a pawn shop, had some unsavory activities in his past that at least raised enough questions to get him off the ballot. He resigned from the ballot. Now we've had 250 plus people apply online, and going this weekend before members of the Democratic State Central Committee. Is this process worthwhile, given that Pat Quinn, the governor, says, I want the State Central Committee to put on the ballot whoever I pick? And yet Pat Quinn says this is a fine process. So where are we?
I think that Pat Quinn, once again, runs the risk of showing that he may not have as much juice with the Central Committee as you would like to think that your governor as a party would. If Mike Madigan said this is a fine process, but we're going to pick who I want to pick, I think a lot more people would believe it and be ready to go there. This thing is got jokes written all over it.
Well, it depends.
I think that the best way to sum it up is, 250 people apply for a job that pays $139,000, $137,000 a year. In this economy, you can't be surprised.
Yeah, and it's a job that beats working for a living. I mean, it's grand political theater. It's a distraction for a while. It allows the party, whenever they make their choice, to create the illusion that says, we made this a wide open process. We let everybody have a turn at it, anybody who wanted to take their shot at it, and we considered everybody. They'll have these open sessions where they'll bring all the participants in, no matter how qualified or unqualified they may be. They'll get their 15 seconds of political fame, and ultimately the decision will be made where it usually is, in a back room someplace.
It is interesting that one of the people who came to the organizational meeting of the Democratic State Central Committee in Springfield last week was Congressman Danny Davis, who is African-American from Chicago. I had thought that he was for Art Turner, who is a state representative, who Madigan, Speaker Michael Madigan, chairman of the Democratic Party, had actually said he was personally for during the primary, but Turner lost to Scott Lee Cohn, who spent like a couple $1 million. And Danny Davis said that, yes, he is for Art Turner, who came in second in a field of, what was it, 6 candidates, I think, in the primary, to be the nominee, and thinks that this is a fine democratic process, the congressman said to me. Yet I'm sure that the process will yield Art Turner at the end. And yet, from what we hear, Governor Quinn certainly hasn't been talking about Art Turner, doesn't seem to be on the radar. So does the party, I guess, first of all, I kept asking people, is this a farce? Because won't you pick somebody we know anyway, like Art Turner? And if not, doesn't the party, isn't there a threat that it looks like a farce and that it creates splinters after this occurs?
The Democrats have to be impeccable in their timing. You have to give this just long enough, like Jim said, to make it look like it's fair and reasonable and not a sham. But that window is going to be very, very small, particularly if it goes to someone like Art Turner. Not that Art Turner is unqualified, not that Art Turner would be a surprise candidate out of nowhere. And this is, once again, I go back, I think this is a governor problem and not a Democratic problem, that the governor says, well, I want my guy, I want my guy, I want my guy, and that guy's not Art Turner. So if he gets picked, you've created a problem for yourself that if someone could just go to the governor and say, hey, Pat, shh, just either this is who it's going to be, or
he's not
lighten
really
up
known
on
for
that.
quieting
And
down.
and so this is where we get back to, as Jim called it, theater. But it could really cause some problems down the line. The Democrats don't need another example of how they can't get things done here in Springfield.
It's loaded with
it
minefields because if you do select Art Turner, that's another Chicago Democrat on a slate that is nothing but Chicago Democrats. Bill Brady, the Republican nominee, will have a field day with that. If you don't pick Art Turner, you run the risk of alienating his African-American base in Chicago and making them very unhappy and wondering why the guy who finished second didn't get chosen then. The governor hasn't yet indicated who his choice would be because he's already stepped in that minefield once by openly courting Tammy Duckworth and having her turn him down.
That was weird.
That was very weird, and again, something that, again, for someone who's been around in politics as long as Pat Quinn, it seems like such a rookie mistake. You don't go publicly touting somebody and saying, I'd love to have you be my person, unless you know for sure that they're going to be your person. You know, you don't just court them publicly and have them spurn you publicly the way it played out. Again, the process has been bizarre from day one, and I think Ben's absolutely correct. There are 99 chances out of 100 that the Democrats look ineffectual, disorganized, confused, chaotic, and very few scenarios actually make it look like this was a well-run machine from the outset.
And don't forget that every time we talk about this, we're not talking about the 20-something-year-old from a lumberyard that was nominated.
Jason Plummer, the Republican nominee.
He is in no way a superior candidate to whoever is going to be picked, but because the Democrats can't move past it, we were going to talk about it. It's not, his time will come, and I hope that someone on the GOP side is preparing him for that day.
Well, one of the members of the state central committee, and I don't recall his name at the moment, he was from Northern Illinois. You know, I asked about, isn't this process, you know, a farce, whatever. He said, well, at least we get to choose. The Republicans are stuck with who they got, which was, you know, you always try to spin these things the best that you can, and that's where that's at. Whoever Pat Quinn ends up having as a running mate, he's still going to, and which, by the way, is supposed to be decided by the State Central Committee next weekend, the 27th.
Correct.
In Springfield, they're supposed to meet, make their decision. Then it might end, unless it doesn't. but that's where that is. Regardless, the legislature's still in session. Pat Quinn is talking about, and from the time he gave his budget address, he wants at least a 1 percentage point increase for now in the state income tax. He's calling it a surcharge for schools as perhaps a way to sell it. Is that going to happen in this election year when school districts across the state are announcing layoffs and lots of other budget problems are there, and a budget projected to be as large as $13 billion in the coming year?
I think the only way you might get it passed is with the approach the governor's taking by trying to link it to education. Unfortunately, not many people believe that he has to slash education by $1.3 billion, which is what he's threatening to do if he doesn't get his tax increase. So they are not sure that that's legitimate or if that's a created threat just to try to sell the tax increase. But quite frankly, we're back to the same stalemate as last year. The Democrats could pass it on their own, but they don't want to do it without Republican votes, and the Republicans have no desire to bail Pat Quinn out of the creation of his party's own making over the last 6 years.
There's no way that a 33% income tax for the schools, for kids, for me, is going to pass. It's not going to happen. The speaker made it very clear the day that the governor gave his speech that it's going to go nowhere. And you do have to applaud the governor for saying what needed to be said. We have to have an increase. And you have to target it. You have to sell it for schools because there's no way else it would make it. But once again, it fits comfortably into this narrative of Pat Quinn doesn't mesh reality with his leadership style. And don't forget, this is a governor who wouldn't fire 2 holdouts from the University of Illinois Board of Trustees. People who everyone in the state was clamoring for their head. He said they're going to go, backed away. He backed away from his social service.
He did let 7 people go.
Yeah, he let
they resigned.
They left.
Yes.
Right.
But when it came down to dropping the axe, he couldn't do something that he would have been applauded for. I don't think there's anybody in the state.
Perhaps not. I mean, those were both African-American members. He ended up getting a lot of votes out of that community in Chicago.
But You really think that he's going to all of a sudden have the virility, to borrow a Blagojevichian term?
Let's not go there.
To drop the axe $1.3 billion on schools, community colleges, universities, and elementary schools?
So you think he's making idle threats? Is that what you're saying?
I think that he's being Pat Quinn.
But how do you not carry out the threat if there's no money? How do you not?
He will be.
Where does the money come from to pay these bills?
He'll be handed a budget by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, and he will be told to manage it.
And it will most likely be the same sort of trickery that we saw last year, a budget that doesn't completely fund the state's expenses, that gives a lot of latitude to the governor to just move pieces around as he sees fit, and probably only covers enough time to get past the election. And that's what he'll take, and he'll wind up signing it without any other alternative. I mean, that's my best guess at this point, because he won't have a lot of other choices. But I think Ben is correct. That the narrative is that the governor paints these scenarios, says it has to be this way, I'm confident it'll be this way, and then it's not that way. And then he just moves on to the next scenario.
Ben, the way you frame this whole thing, a 33% tax, a lot of people are talking about that. Some newspaper headlines talked about that. And yet the state income tax on a person is now 3% of their income. The federal is somewhere in the mid-20s, or, I mean, before Reagan cut it back, it was in the 30s. Is it fair to talk about it in such terms when, you're talking about a tax increase from 3% to 4% on individuals? If you go with what some of the social service people want, because they want more than backfilling the education needs and keeping things going, they want to make sure that people don't have to be laid off in social service agencies all over the state. They want to go with a plan that the Senate actually passed last year, but the House did not, to bring it up to 5%. But that's, they talk. When
you talk about percents, and this is
right, but is it fair to do it? Because
compared
to federal tax, the state tax is still pretty small.
Yeah, and people, and you need to say he wants to raise it 1 percentage point from 3% to 4%. But as Jim knows, when you've got a minute and a half on TV or on the radio, you don't have that extra half a second or 2 seconds or whatever, or people aren't going to process the numbers to say, well, he wants to raise it from 3 percentage points to 4 percentage points. It's easier. They want a number. And last year, he got stuck by our doing, by his doing, by whoever's doing, with a 50% income tax
because he wanted
increase.
it to go from
he wanted it to go from 3 to 3 or
to 4.5.
Right. So and it's a numbers game. It's imperfect, but you have to. You can't just let him get by with it's a 1% surcharge for kids.
I think that Ben's point earlier was well taken. I don't think it really matters what the percentage is or how you describe it. Lawmakers simply aren't going to go along with it in this election year.
All right. The other side of the coin, of course, is Bill Brady is the Republican candidate for governor. He is against tax increases. He actually wants $1 billion more in tax breaks to bring more jobs, which he says will generate the income. Although there are certainly people who have sat at this show in the past say it can't really happen, certainly not fast enough to fill the budget gap. But you also have this group, the Illinois Policy Institute, came out with the alternative budget. Pat Quinn said it's slash. They say no tax increase, cut everything even more than it's going to be cut. And health care, education, you can do away with a lot of the things we have come to know the government provides. Are people willing to accept something like that?
Well, when it really starts to hit close to home, there will be an outcry, there will be upset. But again, we continue to see budgetary trickery and sleight of hand. And I think that we may be down to the last card up somebody's sleeve, but they're going to pull it out and play it before the end of this session. Again, the theory is, what a lot of people are thinking is, they're going to just try to pass a 6-month budget, prolong the inevitable for as long as they can until it all comes crashing down. And given the way the legislature has conducted itself, or the way the state leadership has conducted itself for the last few years, there's no reason to think that that won't be the way it plays itself out, because everything has been a long process of kicking the can a little farther down the road and a little farther down the road until you just simply run out of road.
Two things. One, we had this conversation back when former Governor Blagojevich took us into the extended overtime all the way through August.
Special session after special session.
And lawmakers were saying the only way that they were going to break that cycle then was to let everything come crashing down, to not pay state workers in July, to miss the state aid payments in August, that it had to crash. The state has to fall in before people realize just how bad it is. Two, Quad Cities Democrat Senator Mike Jacobs says, and this is his line, he loves to use it and been using it all session, people are going to have to decide what kind of government they want and what kind of government they're willing to pay for. And it's never been put in that kind of context because for a good majority of people, government really doesn't do anything for them day to day.
Other than the road that you happen to drive on.
But your roads are now falling apart. There haven't been new lanes of new highways built. Schools are starting to run into, you're getting smaller lunch, or your kids aren't getting newer textbooks or that new edition. It's honestly, and I've covered downstate communities long enough, cut a high school football team and you'll see people get outraged about school funding. And that may come.
Actually, in the city of Chicago, the Board of Ed up there has talked about eliminating sophomore sports. And that's created somewhat of a big outcry in the city, and that's the kind of thing that certainly will work to the governor's advantage in trying to get people to pass some new money for schools or to shift some money around to keep
I saw a headline today that the IHSA, the Illinois High School Association, is concerned about the state of education funding. And I know it would be some gamesmanship, but if the governor were to zero out their budget, that would get
IHSA,
a lot of...
Well, they don't
I don't know if they get any state money, but target something that would be important enough to put pressure on high school sports, and all of a sudden you would watch a lot of people realize that. Because right now I've got a book this thick on my desk from the Senate Democrats about education.
The cuts to all the districts.
Cuts, special ed money, transportation money, all of that's gone unfunded, but not under the bright lights.
We talked about special sessions a little bit ago because Rod Blagojevich made this an art, which was really part of the terrible dysfunction of state government during his 6 years. He would just call them in. They would come in for a minute, sometimes just have a few people on the floor and leave for the day. And it was just a game of chicken until something happened. But Governor Quinn has started rhetoric similar to what he used last year, like you don't go on vacation if you have a test until you take your test or something, putting it in educational terms or something silly like that. He seems to be hinting that the legislature should pass this tax increase before they go on spring break just in a couple of weeks. Is that possible at all? Or what will he call it? Special session. I asked Speaker Madigan, will Pat Quinn call a special session? He said, we've tried that before. You ask Pat Quinn, we're asking just them to do the responsible thing. Is this going to blow up on somebody?
And even if the governor did call a special session, the speaker will do what he did last time, which is convene them for 30 seconds and then adjourn.
Wouldn't they show him a little more respect than that?
It doesn't seem likely at this point because they've been, frankly, steamrolling the governor ever since he took office. That, again, just surprised me. And it's the sort of thing where, again, Pat Quinn can be a little bit hard to read. He's been around for a long time. He knows how this all works, and yet he stumbles into some of these things that most observers look at and go, what could he possibly be thinking? There is no way that lawmakers are going to stay around during their spring break just to pass a tax increase that none of them want to have anything to do with.
Well, Pat Quinn says, you've had governors lie to you or not give you the whole truth in the past. I'm being honest. This is what we need to do. Yeah. Is that not a good approach?
They'll give him a vote. If he wants a vote on his tax increase before they go home, they could vote it down tomorrow.
Sure.
Does he want to vote or does he want to pass it? I think the real interesting thing is not spring break, which happens, sort of the last week of this month and then the first 2 weeks of April. Lawmakers are talking about walking out on May 7th. The adjournment date is scheduled for May 7th.
Yeah, which is an extremely early date.
And usually, in the past few years, they've gone to May 31st. I think, and I've heard from a number of people who I would trust their word, that they're going to be done in early May. So what happens then? What happens when they hand the governor this box of bees that is the state budget and say, your turn, and go home? Does he call them back through the end of May? I think he would have a bit more of a bully pulpit there, a bit more support among voters who, and certainly a lot of people who write headlines for a living.
Well, let me ask this. If you're Bill Brady, the Republican candidate for governor who says we need to deconstruct and reconstruct the state budget just like we do in our businesses, is this all good news or bad news that maybe that the Democrats, if you guys are correct, will not pass a tax increase? Where does Bill Brady come in? Because he's still getting himself known. He's still conservative on social and union issues, which Pat Quinn is trying to, use against Brady. But does this end up adding to his benefit in November.
The storyline Bill Brady wants to tell is Pat Quinn is an ineffectual leader. He cannot lead the state. He cannot govern. Every time the governor draws a line in the sand and then has to draw another line in the sand and then another and then another, it just plays right into Bill Brady's hands in that regard. They don't pass budgets. They don't undertake major financial pieces of legislation in April. I mean, you do it in May, you do it in the waning hours of the session. That's just simply how it gets done. For the governor to say you've got to do it like this when there's virtually no chance of it happening, just again makes Pat Quinn look like the one guy who's out there saying, follow me, and everybody's turning around the other direction.
Interesting. All right, well, there was a show of bipartisanship in the last few days. It was in front of the governor's office. There were legislators from both sides with Pat Quinn as he signed a bill. Actually, he signed it in his office. Cameras watched that. Then he came out to talk and answer questions. The primary date, it was so early this year in February, people hardly got through the holiday season without having to trudge to the polls on what was, I guess, still a snowy day in some places in the state. Yeah. And it's going to go back to the third Tuesday in March. Which everybody kind of, newspapers were screaming, editorialists, that it was just an incumbent protection plan, that it was so early after the holidays, not enough time to vet candidates. Maybe we wouldn't have Scott Lee Cohn emerge. Is this a good thing?
People are going to now ignore the primary after St. Patrick's Day as opposed to ignoring it after the holidays.
You have such a good attitude.
Well,
then.
it's look at the numbers. People, people who are interested, people who are motivated, people who get to be motivated by an outside force and get to the polls, they vote. I don't think in the end it's going to matter. I think it's fine. I certainly didn't like having to cover a February primary because I had to work during December and January. And it served its purpose. I think it did
Which,
help.
of course, yeah, I mean, it helped Barack Obama become part of Super Tuesday.
It allowed Illinois to become relevant
and
in the national stage.
Not in 2012, but in 2016, when because President Obama will be running again in 2012, but in 2016. You won't have that scenario. We'll be complaining again that Illinois is irrelevant in the process because their primary will come after all the Super Tuesday states. The governor kept saying we want to make it as easy as possible for people to participate. Well, the thought is then, well, why not move the primary to a Saturday? Why not move it to a day when people don't have to worry about going to work? Why not have it in May when there's even less chance of a March snowstorm, as we've been known to have on primary day here in Illinois?
Why not allow people to just show up and vote?
I do know they worked with
a Democrat or
by internet or whatever.
I do know they work with circuit clerks because there are so many deadlines leading up to a vote that they wanted some separation between the primary and the general. So I think this was kind of an agreement to go back to where Illinois was.
It's
definitely
definitely
Tuesday in March.
It's definitely an improvement and definitely a step in the right direction. But we're going to need, I think, a better quality of politician to get people really interested in primaries again.
Yeah, it's everybody wanted to turn out and vote for Barack Obama, and that's done. So we can go back to everybody.
Right. As long as we're talking about Barack Obama, Mark Kirk. U.S. Senate candidate Republican, congressman now from northern suburbs of Chicago, was heard on a tape that made it to the campaign of his Democratic opponent, Alexei Giannoulias, saying he would fight to repeal health care if health care passes, and that he predicted that what did he call the president?
That guy?
Something.
This guy?
This guy would be a one-term president, or we're going to see that he is. And of course, Alexei Giannoulias issued a statement, this is a terrible thing, show respect for our president, and this is the blockade the Republicans have in Congress. Is this, I don't know, it seems like perhaps it's at least a significant step. We're not talking about Alexei's bank. So, I mean, how big a deal?
And he's happy.
How big a deal, at least
that.
for a couple of days, how big a deal is this?
Well, I think it's a little bit silly if you're going to go after Kirk for this, to say be more respectful. Politics ain't beanbag, and I think most people in Illinois understand that. I don't know that they're that concerned if Mark Kirk refers to the president as this guy. But there may be an issue there, and where you've got to paint the difference between Giannoulias and Kirk is, Mark Kirk is saying we're going to go back and we're going to repeal health care in 2013 and before anybody has reaped any of the benefits of it, which to me sort of implied that there may be benefits down the road, but we're going to get rid of this before that ever happens. If I'm Alexei Giannoulias, I'm going to say, well, what are you going to do for the hundreds of thousands or the million or so people in Illinois that don't have health insurance? You're going to repeal this. You're going to make it harder for those people to get coverage, but what's your alternative? That should be the real issue, not just that Mark Kirk took the gloves off talking about Barack Obama.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's not the worst thing that the president has heard said about him. The part from the article, the Lynn Sweet piece that bothered me,
of the Sun Times,
and this bothers me about the Kirk campaign in general, is that they're doing most of this stuff off the radar, and they're not being very open.
No press.
And he wants to show up at very controlled, very, yay, Mark Kirk rallies, and then boom, gone. And there's and that I don't think is good. I think
Although
that is
Lynn
far
Sweet
more
has been very good
disrespectful.
about, Lynn Sweet of the Sun-Times, who worked in Springfield for a while at the State House, has been very good about trying to open the process of where people are having their campaign events. And I think she used to complain about Barack Obama's, some of his events not being open as well. So, to be fair here.
If people want to talk about his respect or his disrespect, he should be a bit more respectful of voters and not just
Kirk.
Yes, Kirk, and not just show up at Republican Party faithful.
It is true. He did get out of debates in the primary, but you know what? When he had a field of like 7 Republican candidates and everybody was more conservative than him, it seemed to have worked because he got like 57% of the total vote and just walked.
And this is why I think it would in some ways be a good thing for the legislature to wrap up early so that we could turn our focus to this, because unfortunately I think he's getting a bit of a pass because of all of the other problems in this state. Nobody's really on him yet, and I hope that changes.
There's really 2 Mark Kirks. I mean, the public-facing commercials and things is a moderate, even-tempered guy who's willing to work across the aisles, but you get him into these more partisan settings away from the press, and this was not a reporter's camera that captured this, it was just somebody who was there in attendance. It's a much more partisan approach to it, and I think Ben's correct. At this point, he's able to have it both ways, and until some more of a light is shined on that race consistently, it's going to be hard to match up those 2 Mark Kirks.
Well, it's going to be a national race that both parties throw a lot of money at.
And that's going to be the shame of it, is that it's going to end up decided by third-party TV commercials in October, where you can't turn on a game and not watch Mark Kirk.
You don't think that our voters are going to be turned by television commercials, do you, Ben?
You don't want to know what I think.
And on that note, we're going to have to turn our viewers away from us now, sadly, but we appreciate your being here. I'd like to thank Jim Leach and Ben Yount for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.